Well, tonight, we're very much going to spend time in discussion. So the questions that I'm going to be asking are just going to be to facilitate the beginning of the discussion. And then however it goes, I'll be taking notes. I would like everybody to be writing notes on their cards. If you want to follow up, if you have really something specific you want answered, please put that down, because that's what this is all about, so we can have a discussion. But to start that, I want to have our panelists introduce themselves to you. And instead of me reading a paragraph biography, I would like them to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about what they're focusing on really right now in their careers, in their walk, in their life, whatever they want to address. I'm going to let them address, and we're going to start with Lynette.
Well, I became a teacher back when it was possible to teach educably mentally handicapped students with an IQ of 80 and below how to read better than many students can read now. That's the way we used to do things before all the changes. I'm the president of my greatest accomplishment in life, and the president of Women Volunteers in Politics. We meet every fourth Thursday, our people are all here, and we have a really good group. Only conservative. We're conservative. No, we're a Christian conservative political organization. And a friend of mine named Pernicano, you all know that restaurant, Joan Pernicano and I started the Scripps Ranch. Conservative group is what we started. And we changed our name to Cactus because we are the Conservative Action Committee to Unseat Socialists. And that is what we're action. So Volunteers in Politics is an action group, and Cactus is action, and I'm running. 3 of us here are running for the Central Committee, and our action will be to make the Republican Party what it's supposed to be. That's our action.
Thank you, Lynette. That's outstanding. Thank you. Frank?
Good evening, and first of all, I'd like to say thank you to Rock Church and to the Salt and Light for inviting this esteemed panel today. I'm really honored and privileged to be here. My name is Frank Dowse, and I'm here specifically to talk and hopefully add some value with regards to terrorism and foreign policy as it relates to us as Christians in this nation. And more importantly, if we can kind of delve through our conundrum, I guess, between being citizens in a state that is increasingly becoming less Christian with that of our nation, our culture, our history, with our Judeo-Christian background, and how do we square those two. So hopefully I can talk a little bit about that tonight and any other issues that you might have. Just a little bit about my own background. I was a Marine officer for 20 years. I spent 20 years both overseas, spent a lot of time overseas. But I also started my own company, worked with a German company in security crisis management and mitigation response services in the realm of negotiations, kidnap and ransom negotiations, executive protective measures. And then I have my own company as well, but I've been picked up full-time for Naval Special Warfare in Coronado, where I'm working with the United States Special Operations Command and with the Naval Special Warfare, as commonly known as the SEALs, which is, for me as a Marine, a real honor, but I do feel like the only jet amidst all of the sharks. I'm trying to do my thing there. But it is a very interesting place. I would just like to say, and I just kind of have to get this out of the way, that in no way, shape, or form are any of my comments this evening a reflection of the United States Special Operations Command or Naval Special Warfare. I'm here as my own citizen, and as a Christian, and as an American. So I really appreciate the opportunity to do that.
If you want to hang around, you can hear me and Frank afterwards, cheering and jumping around about defending our Second Amendment rights afterwards. So we're both big fans of that.
I like where his mind's at.
Frank did want to mention that he will be at a table, even though he didn't bring any material. He will be at a table afterwards if you'd like to get his email, get more information on his company, or just to chat with him. He'll be the table without anything on it. So I'll lay across, if you want to lay across the table like this, and people can come up. So, but great, thanks, Frank. Mike?
Yeah, hi. It is an honor to be here. I have not done many of these panels. I come basically down from Orange County. I currently am on the Central Committee for the GOP, for the Republican Party in Orange County. Kind of frustrating. I was a big Reagan fan early on. I knew how upset I was in my youth watching what Jimmy Carter was doing to this country. Really just having a defeatist attitude about what he was doing. Then Reagan came in. And watching our watching our prisoners released that first day and just watching what strength does really instilled in me what we need to be as a country, and it has ebbed and flowed ever since. And getting involved about 4 or 5 years ago, watching what was coming down the pipe, not being excited about what George Bush was doing, both, especially down here on the border, we were very frustrated with that, but then watching as things progressed to where it is now, I got more and more active. I always call myself a founding Tea Party guy, and have been very, very involved in that movement. But beyond that, trying to push conservatism and the conservative ideology and in a Christian basis. My dad is a pastor, or was a pastor, he's retired now. But just how that all comes together. And it's been a nonstop education ever since. Once I found Audible and audiobooks, I've about 27 books last year, just trying to stay on top of things, staying very active, trying to be at everything. I usually have a camera in my hand or my video camera, trying to document and get the word out. Been to DC a bunch of times. But that's what got me more visible and more in tune with what folks are doing. What I found at the Central Committee is that we did not get enough of the Tea Party conservatives in there this round, and we're really, really pushing this election on June 5th to get more. This will be my first run at some level for the executive board, and really try to push more of a conservative activist role in that committee. So it is a great honor to be here. On a personal level, I've got 28 years in real estate and now in mortgage. I saw what was going on with the cronyism that was going on through Wall Street, how the liberal ideology of the Community Reinvestment Act and the easing of the guidelines got us to where we are now. Everybody wants to point the fingers at the borrowers, at the lenders, at the government. You know, except for the government, it's everybody's fault, but it's almost entirely the government's fault because they were the ones that eased the guidelines that got us to where we are today. Brad and I talked about that at lunch a number of months ago, and it is what caused what we're doing today. I'm trying to really rationalize whether it was all intended to get us to this point, but either way it happened, and that's why we are where we are.
Thank you, Mike. There was a question earlier I'd like you to answer. Voting for the Central Committee.
Yes.
And is it, first of all, who can vote, and is it statewide?
So when I first decided to run for Central Committee a couple of years ago, I had to ask, what is the Central Committee? Somebody had me running. I was like, what is this? You know, they know I like to be out there and that I'm a fighter. So basically it's well, at least I know the Democrats and the Republicans have their own Central Committees. I don't know if the third parties have their own, but the Democrats, and they do, what do they? Okay, yeah, the parties all have their own Central Committees, 6 members per assembly district. So figure out where the new lines are. That'll tell you where the new map is. But it's a purely a partisan election. So if you're a registered Republican, you can only vote for the Republicans. If you're a registered independent, you pretty much, I don't think you get a vote for pretty much anybody. But if you're looking to vote for your friends in the Republican Party and you're not registered Republican, you can't vote for them. So it's once again assembly district only, and there are a lot of candidates running this year. And I know there's 22 running in my specific assembly district in Orange County. So it's going to be interesting.
Right. Thank you, Mike. Brad, please.
Sure. Let's see here. My name is Brad Dacus. I'm the attorney and president and founder of the Pacific Justice Institute. And it's a real pleasure to be here. We founded it about 15 years ago, almost exactly 15 years ago. We now have 5 offices in California. One of them is here in San Diego, where one of our fiercest attorneys is located, Peter Lepiscopo. I would not want to go into court against him. And anyway, yeah. So anyway, we also handle more case matters on the West Coast, defending faith, family, and freedom to this huge network of over 500 volunteer affiliate attorneys just in California alone. And we handle more than any other organization of our kind, bar none, doing this work on the West Coast. And so it's really exciting to be here. We're about a huge team of attorneys making an impact. Right now, we're really concerned about SB 1172. Very, very concerned about it. It is the most ugliest piece of legislation I have ever witnessed in my life. And I guess we're going to talk about those things later on, right? Right? Or,
would you please give a brief overview of it, and then yes, let's discuss it.
Yeah, because you guys want to know about this. Just real briefly, it does 3 things. First, it prohibits anyone under the age of 18 from getting any kind of professional counseling or therapy with regards to sexual orientation struggles that they have. Okay, period. Against the law, done. Illegal in the state of California. Now, of course, these children, they need this. The suicide rate is high, depression is high. But no, only affirmative counseling that affirms that homosexuality will be allowed in the land of the free and the home of the crazy in California. So people in Texas have different analogies, but all the same. But anyway, so we have, you can maybe share them, Starboy. No, but, because I used to live there. Anyway, the other thing is, second is that it's going to put heavy restrictions on people 18 and over from getting counseling with regards to sexual orientation issues. Heavy restrictions to really put out of business those who are engaging in that kind of counseling. And then third, and the ugliest of it, is that it will deem parents who are not affirming of their children's homosexuality, but give them any kind of rejection or non-acceptance of their homosexuality, that will be deemed rejection, and that will be qualified under the category of abuse for purposes of child protective services and possible permanent seizure of children. And I've been in juvenile court. I understand how that works, and the fact that they have the audacity to extend it to every family, potentially, that is not going to help steer their child in the right way, is horrific. And the ugliest of the ugly news is that it's already passed both committees in the state senate. It's headed for a vote probably by the early first part of June. We will have it decided one way or the other state senate. So far, every Democrat on the panels have voted for it. Every Republican has voted against it. Guess how the numbers work? It's going to pass the state senate unless there's a massive outcry, and then it will pass the state assembly unless there's massive outcry. And then Jerry Brown will probably pass it unless he just has a feeling or something and goes the other way. Then it'll become law, and we at Pacific Justice are already, we've testified against it, but we've held back some of our primary arguments against it because we're pretty convinced it's going to become law. And then we are going to be filing a lawsuit immediately to challenge it as unconstitutional. That's all I can really say about that part of it. So yeah, so if you want to keep up with our cases, in case I forget, everyone has these little white sheets. How many of you get our press releases? Case updates, raise your hand. We're nice and high, so everyone can see that. Okay, you're not the only ones. Okay, good. If you guys, these two important people, they raise their hands. So if you guys could be so kind as to fill these out before you leave, so we can keep you updated. I really, really appreciate that a lot. And we have a little table over there you can put them on as well. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Brad. Barbara?
Hi, my name's Barbara Decker, and I was like everybody else. I always voted and checked on the candidates and thought I did my part. And then probably about 10 years ago, I started getting interested in things that were going on in San Diego. It was primarily about the border. And I was concerned about closing the borders, so I got involved with Numbers USA, which is in Arlington, Virginia, and they educated us on the importance of immigration. And then came the last election, and with the passage of health care, I knew immediately, or with all the things that were being passed, I knew I needed to get involved, and I joined the first Tea Party. I signed up for iCaucus. I took Constitution classes. I read the 5,000 Year Lead twice. I read everything I could online. I went to every meeting I could because I was really asleep, and I didn't realize how asleep I was. And along the way, I found out about United Nations Agenda 21, and someone said to me, "Oh, you can't talk about that. That's a conspiracy theory." And somehow it grabbed me. It was right before Christmas, 2 years ago, and it grabbed me. And I knew it was something that people needed to know about. At the time, the next elections were coming along. I campaigned for Mason Weaver. He lost. I campaigned for Nick Popovich and Rick Powell. They lost. And after everything was over, I went, okay, it's my job to inform people about this. So I started handing out flyers everywhere I went, hoping someone else would take the ball, because I really didn't want to do it. I was looking for somebody like Brad or someone who could really speak in front of a crowd. And then I was taking a class, Discovering God, and in the course of this Bible study, they said, you will know God is in your life when He wants you to do a project that is bigger than anything you could ever imagine. I'm like, oh, please not me. Okay, I'll make you my partner. I will go out and I will start to talk to people. And at that time, people started asking me to talk, and so I had to get a presentation together, and had to learn how to do a PowerPoint, and had to figure out how to talk about this giant, huge plan that's been in effect for almost 20 years and nobody knows about. Wow. Most people found out about it maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and it's been implemented. So I'm going to talk about how it's been implemented, and I think it's Ezekiel 2 and 3. If you know about something and you don't tell people, you're in big trouble. So with that said, that's what my mission is to inform as many people as possible. I might just turn the switch on tonight. You still may have doubts. But when you start to look around, you're going to see it. And you begin to see it everywhere, and you go, oh my gosh. And you need to tell your family and your friends about it, because it includes, there's a whole pagan component. There's the whole school component. They want to make our children global citizens. My daughter graduated from Long Beach State a couple of years ago, and the man at the podium said, and now we are all global citizens. My husband practically had to hold me in my seat. I wanted to stand and scream, I'm an American. I'll never be anything but an American. So with that said, I will pass it on to...
Thank you. Dr. Scarborough.
Well, my name is Rick Scarborough. I'm a Baptist preacher by training and calling. I fell in love with Jesus about 43 years ago and never quite got over it. Hope I never do. In the process of building an aggressive soul-winning church in Houston, I stumbled into a controversial high school assembly. In fact, I'd been in that particular pulpit for about 18 months. We baptized 500 people. We were looking for property to relocate the church, and in all honesty, the world's worst time to get involved in a controversy. Felt that coming on. I was trying to avoid that. If you see me reach my briefcase, I may take a swig of my Baptist vodka here in just a moment. It's called cough medicine, but it works. I've been told vodka will do the same thing, but I take cough medicine. But I'm joking, of course. Are we editing this tape?
No, we're going to work on that later.
But if I get to coughing, I'll have to take what I call a swig of that. But in the course of pastoring the church, a lady walked out the back door one morning after the morning worship and said, Pastor, have you heard about the assembly tomorrow? Well, I listened for a few moments, decided I'd better do a little more investigation. The short of it, I attended the 5th of 5 assemblies conducted at our local high school under the guise of AIDS awareness. The young lady who was sponsored by AIDS Foundation of Houston, who had caused such a furor in other schools before getting to Pearland, came to our school. She discussed every kind of sex act you can imagine, some that you certainly shouldn't imagine. Best way I can summarize in a setting like this the nature of the assembly. She told our young people, including my daughter who was present in that particular assembly I attended, that the kind of sex our former president engaged in the Oval Office was the safest kind of sex that teenagers could engage in. Well, when she pulled out a condom and stretched it and blew it up like a balloon and said that if kids would use a condom, it'd be 94% effectively protected against the dread disease of AIDS, I raised my hand. She thought I was a principal, no doubt, because I was suited in a tie that morning. She was very courteous, called on me. Well, I challenged her facts. I challenged her statistics. I had, at that point, in fact, in many quarters, they were still calling the disease GRIDS, Gay-Related Immune Deficiency Syndrome. That was not politically correct. It was quickly changed, but it was still in 1992 called GRIDS in many places. I had been reading everything I could get my hands on the subject because it was a brand new disease. It threatened the entire health system of the United States of America because of the blood supply. And so I was well versed. And in hindsight, I have no doubt that God was preparing me for the task that was about to be assigned, as he often does. But I had facts. I challenged her statistics. She knew I had the facts. A lady in the audience stood up and came to her defense, and it became obvious that we were about to have you know, a very probably ill-timed and a poorly planned confrontation. So I just sat down and acquiesced, but I carried into that meeting a dictaphone, so I got her remarks on tape. I went back to our pulpit, or back to our church, I should say, made a couple of phone calls to a couple of practicing attorneys, one in particular by the name of Cactus Cagle, whom I've written about. He now is a sitting district judge. Wouldn't you like to go before a district judge? Guilty, knowing you're guilty, and his name is Cactus. Well, I called Cactus, asked him what the repercussions could be if I made that transcript public. He called me back about an hour later and he said, well, Rick, in our state, public assemblies, public information, you can do with what you like. The only reason I never called to start with was to determine if I was going to do this as citizen Rick Scarborough or as pastor Rick Scarborough. You know, the Bible says, before you wage a war, count the cost. And before I drug the whole church into a public war, I wanted to know what the ramifications could be. But with that opinion from an attorney that I had great confidence in, I then put on our signboard on the busiest thoroughfare on the southeast side of Houston, if you want to hear what the kids heard at PHS, Pearland High School, come Sunday morning. Well, that worked very well. In fact, it exceeded any church growth strategy I'd ever before tried. It was, I like to say, all the CEOs came. You know, the CEOs in any given church are the Christmas, Easter only crowd. Show up twice a year. Actually, in Baptist churches, they show up 4 times a year if the pastor happens to get hired and fired during the same cycle of Christmas and Easter. So they were all there. And we had to put chairs out. We had people literally standing in the offings. Well, I was born at night, but I wasn't born last night. I determined this would be a great opportunity for evangelism. So I set aside the transcript, preached a straight-up gospel sermon, saw 7 adults come to the altar that morning for salvation. But by that time, it was time for all those good Baptists to go home. I sat them down, held up the 13-page, single-spaced, front and back transcript of the assembly, and said, if you want to hear what the kids heard Sunday, after a 5-minute, or here at church on Sunday, if you want to hear what they heard last Monday at school, after a 5-minute break, I'm going to read this word for word, just like it was spoken, 4-letter words and all. So with that enjoinder, and an opportunity to leave, and some did, I then sat them back down, and I read the 13-page transcript, 4-letter words and all. There are some little old ladies in Pearland, Texas, who still can't believe they heard their pastor say those words from the pulpit. But folks, sometimes we're so heavenly minded, we're no earthly good. Now let me share with you what happened out of that. That mobilized a congregation to get involved. Everyone to that point just believed all that was happening somewhere else, but not at their high school. And no one who looked at the facts with any moral foundation at all could agree that this was appropriate, and especially as a directive coming from our school to our students. In fact, I stood before the school board that had to be moved 4 times the following Monday to accommodate the crowds, about 400 of them from our congregation alone, but there were about 700 who attended. That typically 10 to 12 people attended. School board meeting, the only time we go, it's unfortunate, is when we're upset about something. But I stood before that school board, who was angry at me at the outset, and 2 or 3 things happened. And I've written about this in detail. I've been interviewed 1,000 times on national radio, and there have been 2 documentaries produced that include information about this subject, so I won't go into all the detail. But the short of it was, I personally learned about 4 things I never forgot, among which are these. Number 1, I found out that in that case, those 7 school board members were not my enemies. They were, in fact, my neighbors, and in some case, my friends. But because they were only hearing from one side, they had tilted in the wrong direction. The absence of our voice as a Christian community had enabled them to literally be brainwashed by the other side. Number 2, I found out on that day that politicians could count. because they began very angry with me for causing what erupted into a citywide controversy and would have been a national controversy had I done interviews that week. But we ended up after that Sunday morning on the front page of the metropolitan section of the Houston Chronicle with a full-page story on the Baptist preacher taking on the school board. But in the course of my remarks, 5 minutes I was allotted, but I was interrupted about 11 times by standing ovations. And it took about 15 minutes to say those 5 minutes of remarks. And I watched the school board go from my pitted enemies to neutral to my friends when they realized where the tide of public opinion was. I never forgot that. The only thing politicians ultimately hear are the footsteps. They don't see the light until they feel the heat. And numbers speak. The great truth I can share with you tonight is apathy plays into our hands. So few people are involved in most civil, or city, I should say, elections, or county or school board elections, that one congregation, especially the size of the one we're in right now, can sway the whole direction of that election.
Right.
Our church had 3,000 members. Our community at that time had 19,000 total citizens. As a suburb of Houston, we could literally, out of our church, swing the direction of any election. We mobilized. The third thing I realized that day is I had been derelict as a pastor because I'd been busy building the church. I'd spent a good 5 years of my life in theological training. I'd bought into the lie that you don't mix church and politics. I bought into the lie that the two things you don't speak about out in public are religion and politics, the two things we probably don't talk about the most. I bought all those lies, and I'd begun to live those lies. So I repented. The fourth thing I learned is this. Political office and political activity is as much a ministry of the church as is any other ministry that the church engages in. And we have been in addressing that. So, while I was pastoring, I pastored a church 12 years, we built Vision America. In 2002, because of demands on my time, in terms of speaking beyond the church, I wrote several books and booklets about the subject. Because of the demands on my time, I handed the reins of that church over to my executive pastor, who's still pastor of that church to this day. Began traveling around the country, mobilizing pastors into the moral and political arena. In the 10 states we've worked in, we've never lost until 2008 in any election that we addressed. We have never taken a partisan position. We've never endorsed a candidate. But we ask pastors to do four things. Number one, register every adult in their congregation and in the sphere of their influence to vote. You cannot vote if you're not registered. Number two, we ask the pastor to commit to inform their people on what the issues are. And the best way to do that is through nonpartisan voter guide information that Eagle Forum and other groups make readily available to them. We supply them when they don't have the initiative themselves to get them. But we ask them to pass out voter guide information during election cycles. Number three, we ask the pastor to go and vote early for two reasons. On Tuesday, he's liable to have a death in his church or there's some emergency and not be able to vote. But if you go down during the 2 weeks preceding an election cycle, it's easy to vote. And that also enables the pastor to do the fourth thing, and that's stand in the pulpit on Sunday morning before election day and say, I've already voted. Tuesday is your day. Churches do what we do, not what we say. And that's proven time and time again. And in the states where we have worked, beginning in Texas in 2002, when we mobilized 2,500 pastors, when you hear all of these marvelous things taking place in Texas right now regarding defunding Planned Parenthood, the most pro-life state in the United States, arguably, lawsuit abuse reform, where we now have loser pay, a host of other things I could share with you. That has come as a result of both houses of our state legislature being controlled by conservative pro-life and pro-family legislatures, which happened for the first time in 2002 when 2,500 pastors got involved, and every state office holder in our state for the last 10 years being elected pro-life, pro-family, and very vocal about it. I would to God that our governor was about to be was the nominee for the Republican Party for president. Unfortunately, it wasn't God's timing, And besides that, we believe in Texas that a clone took his place, because the guy that went to the national stage is not the guy we know as our state governor, but he is a very committed Christian, very articulate Christian, and there are extenuating circumstances that hurt that, and we're not here to discuss that. But the point is to say that whole thing began in 2002 when preachers got involved. I will conclude my initial remarks by saying this: as the church goes, so goes the nation. Yeah. America's in a mess because the church is in a mess. But let me finish that statement by saying this: as the pastor goes, so goes the church. When you have a pastor who will not allow anything like this to take place, you're going to have a church that ignores everything that's going on beyond the church. And anywhere the church is not, God called us to be salt and light. Salt seasons. Salt delays decay. It doesn't stop decay, but it delays the decay. We know that finally certain things have to happen before Jesus comes. But when you put the salt in the salt shaker and remove it from the public place, you expedite that delay, that decay. And Christians in America, unfortunately, have been brainwashed with a false teaching that says somehow, or rather a false understanding, that they interpret all of the scriptures regarding the second coming around America. Well, that happens to be a word to the church universal. And there are many Christians today, right now, suffering, believing they are in the tribulation in various parts of the world where they're under dire persecution. There is no assurance that we're going to be zapped out of this world before Jesus comes. And if we allow this country to continue to sink in the mire of moral degeneration that it's headed in, then we're going to see the church openly persecuted in this country. That's why the church must stand up now and speak up and get involved.
Right. On a side note, Dr. Rick, I went to high school in Houston, and we played against Pearland in the quarterfinals, and they beat us in 1988, and I'm not bitter. Okay, moving on. I'll get over that. I've got the cold sweats again. I remember the game. It's terrible. So, you know, football in Texas, what can you do? So for the panel, what we're going to do on these topics is they're not going to be directed to one individual. I want you to chime in. You guys will kind of have to jump in when you feel it's a topic you're comfortable with. Specifically, we're going to start with education. But it's not just about, there's going to be education view from both kind of the classroom side, of what's going on in the classroom with our kids, and also education viewed from what's going on at the state level and how that specifically affects not just Christian families, but families across the board in the state of California. So panelists, you guys jump in when you feel comfortable on a question, and we're going to get started. This is the first question we have. So somebody mentioned, we already talked about SB 48, and that has passed into law as of January. The question is, there have been a number of laws passed in recent years, example SB 48, which seek to encourage a fair and inclusive educational environment free from discrimination. This is always how they guise the laws when they're passed. It seems like they always end up discriminating against Christians. What might be the effects of such laws in our schools? And I want to go even a step further. What would be the effects on those laws to our families? Who would like to start?
Well, does anybody know about 2 years ago in one of the churches, one of the schools near the Ed Center, near Normal, they had an afternoon recess. And do you know why they had an afternoon recess? To allow the Muslims to have their afternoon prayer time. Now, do you think that they would have an afternoon recess to let Christians get together? They don't even, most schools, not all, most schools won't even let Christians have a Bible study. But we are kowtowing to the Muslims because they'll riot or I don't know what they'll do. They'll do terrible things if you don't do what they say. But Christians are milquetoast, you know, oh, well, it's God's will. We shouldn't, I don't know what they say, but they say ridiculous things. So we need to start acting like we're the Muslims and say, we demand a Bible study before school for all the students who want to come in the chemistry lab. Because that's what I had when I was in high school. The chemistry teacher let us use his lab. We'd have to make demands.
With regards to the SB 48, the results of it, We at Pacific Justice Institute have been working with the coalition to actually draft the response to Class Act. And I will tell you that if that's not stopped, as was mentioned before, every classroom that teaches history or social science, all grade levels, will by state law have to implement and recognize alleged homosexual and or transsexual role models in history, like for example in 4th grade California history specifically. And it's very speculative and it's not productive. The problems are using the word discrimination. The neat thing about the Class Act is we use the word discrimination also. And we said that they were pointedly very clear that no one shall be discriminated against by being recognized in history for their accomplishments or their deeds simply because of the group that they may be a part of. Right. And so I think what we need to be doing is using that same language. Once I was on the O'Reilly factor, and he agreed with me, so I was okay.
Paul Troon.
Yeah, and one thing I did though, and I think is really valuable for us to do this, is it was about a public school with a homosexual orientation program for elementary school kids for down to 2nd grade level. And I said, you know, this school district needs to learn to be tolerant and sensitive to the wide diversity of parents with differing views and perspectives. And their narrow-minded attitude is but bigotry and discrimination against this wide diversity of parents needing sensitivity and tolerance. And I just swallowed up the language of the left to make my point, and by doing so, took seize the center of the bell curve with liberal language with the conservative argument. And when we're dealing with secular press and secular people, use the liberal language, forget the these and the thous, and we can actually start really getting our message across. And O'Reilly loves that because he's a conservative, but he loves liberal language on his show to make conservative points. He does it all the time.
Right, thank you, Frank.
I'm just going to say, not George Orwell said, I think it was, he who controls the past controls the future. And with that, what you see in totalitarian regimes, one of the first things they do is capture education.
That's right.
My wife is from the former Soviet Union. She's an American and does some pretty interesting stuff for her country now. But she and I were watching a movie several years ago called Enemy at the Gates. I don't know if how many of you have seen that movie. Okay. At one point, they have the Soviet troops that are running off of the trains into the German machine gun fire. The problem is that they also had what's called the NKVD, which is the predecessor to the KGB, behind them, telling them basically to go forward, because if you don't, we're going to shoot you on the way back. She did not believe that. She absolutely could not believe that. She had no reference point for that absolutely documented truth to be in her fiber. And I see this with my wife, occasionally, not so much. She's very educated and very astute. And by the way, by no fault of my own, she has become an avid conservative, which I'm very grateful for. Thank you, God. But my mother-in-law, on the other hand, is a product of Soviet communism, is a product of Stalinism. And that is what you will get, is you will get a whole generation of people, if we do not look at things like SB 48, if we don't take on the type of ardent and fervent motivation that we're seeing from Lynette here with regards to standing tall. That's our first line of defense, is our education. So I would just put that as a reference point. Thank you.
Anybody else like Mike?
Well, yeah, I was just going to make a point too that the SB 48, as far as I understand, it's for homeschooling, charter, everything. There's no.
Well, just public funded.
Oh, public funded. Okay.
Presently, just public funded include charter schools, but make no mistake, the agenda is inevitably to have a mandate applied to all schools, private, homeschooling, and everything. That's the long-term agenda that they've already succeeded in other countries. So,
yeah. Well, the point I was going to make was that progressivism, and they were brilliant early on. At the turn of the previous century, they opted to get into the education system, obviously take over the students, take over the, as I said, change the history and formulate what these kids are thinking. It goes everything from the global warming issues that we're going to be covering a little bit later, to getting God out of our household, and the destruction of the family. They have to destroy the family unit as well. That raise a kid with a village ideology is what they want to do, and they're funding basically from birth on, they're trying to take our kids away from us. That's the biggest fight.
Wow. The next question I have specifically to voucher programs. What potential impact would a voucher program have on the quality of education for our youth? We could say statewide or even a federal voucher program.
I wish I could say that there was hope in California of ever getting something like that, because
Maybe we
we
should
know,
talk federal.
we know that in Wisconsin it has helped tremendously. Oh, that's why, is that why they hate the
That's why it's
governor?
being recalled.
Okay.
Thank you,
But I want to
Junior.
tell you, we don't have hope, not with the legislature and the Senate that we have now, because we fought for vouchers in around 92, and it went down just really quick.
I want a little comment on that. I think the status quo is correct, but here's the qualifier. The strategy of the opposition is, do they go into Texas and push for gay rights marriage? Are they pushing that big time, real aggressive? Probably not, because they know they don't have Texas. But they're pushing it where they can get it, knowing that with that momentum, eventually they will get Texas, unless they don't secede. But anyway, so I think what we need to do strategically is realize that as we make progress in other states for vouchers, and the truth and the effectiveness of the vouchers becomes compelling all the more, then as we continue down our road of digression in California, I think then we can start selling the masses on why vouchers work and why they're successful, as long as we maintain the rights of the states to be able to do that and protect states' rights to do that. That's a very powerful weapon that we have, because truth in the end trumps. And when it's implemented by other states, it can influence even California, I think, in the long run. But she's absolutely right where we are. It is pretty pathetic.
And as a reminder, please, if you have any specific questions to education or anything else we're covering, make sure you're writing them down, so when we go to the Q&A, we can go through them real quick and make sure we get them answered.
One more group point. Something we at Pacific Justice are going to be launching later this year. It's a major campaign to liberate teacher union workers who no longer want any of their dues ever to go to the union again, have all of it go to a charity pursuant to federal law Title VII. Only 1 in 1,000 teachers know about this. And if we're successful with our campaign and we get the backing to do it, every union worker in America will know of their rights to no longer be a part of the union or paying money to their union. And I think that could be a real weakening factor for the #1 group of opposing vouchers and opposing what we stand for are the unions, and specifically the teachers union.
Yeah.
So it's a great way to massively undercut their root system, and Lord willing, we'll be successful.
It's funny, this question. We're going to preempt it. Definitely keep us up to date on that. That's awesome. This question says, statistics show that the education system has become less effective over time. It's kind of funny if you follow the news and know what's going on in Florida just this week. They had the statewide testing for reading and writing, and they had such a large failure rate. The Board of Education sat down and decided to decrease the passing grade so they get more people passed, because over 55% of the kids failed. And they said, well, the teachers didn't have time to prep them for this specific test. And it's a grade level test. It's not master's degree level stuff that only a few kids really would go for that. It's supposed to be grade level specific, reading and writing. It's so many failures, they decided, instead of changing how they're teaching, to vote to lower the passing grade. That happened this week in the state of Florida. But this question is, what changes of the culture of the education system are predominantly responsible for the decline in education?
I have to tell you that I grew up on the south side of Chicago. So when I talked about that high school where we had Bible study, that was in Chicago. But I taught in Illinois, and I taught in a small town in 1967. It was my second year teaching, and there was a case in DeKalb, Illinois. I taught in DeKalb County. It was called Despain versus DeKalb Public Schools. A little kindergarten teacher in DeKalb had the little prayer in her kindergarten, God is great, God is good, and we thank Him for our food, before they had snack. The Despain family sued, and they won. What did the churches do? Close your eyes. Nothing. The churches did nothing about it. And if you read David Barton's book, The Myth of Separation, that's on page 2. That was the case. It was not Madeleine Murray O'Hair that took prayer out of schools. it was the Lyle Despain family in DeKalb, Illinois. And you probably never heard of DeKalb, Illinois, did you? But the thing is, when, like I told you, when I started teaching school, the standards were high, and every kid really, when they graduated from high school, they had an education. But at that time, 1967, is when it all started to go down. And when I was at NIU, Northern Illinois University, there was a hallway in the administration building for all of these organizations to post their news and notes. There was one called the SDS, the Students for Democratic Society. And that was also the beginning. It was in the mid-60s. And that is when it all started to decline, when the left came in and took over education and everything.
I think you'll find that almost all of this is coming from that same era. SDS, which, how many of you know much about Glendack? Glenn and the different things that they've covered with SDS and the education, and a big part of it is, and I'm not in education, but from what I hear, with all the social justice, environmental justice, and all the different moves that they've got our students out doing these kinds of things and not learning to read, write, and do arithmetic. It's more socially orientated, warm and fuzzy, feel-good exercises, and not actually learning. It's I always like to say, it's entitling our little snowflakes to think that they're special, and think that you're wonderful and you're one of a kind, and you don't, and give everybody passing
snowflake.
grades. That's right. Yeah. So that's been the problem, is that they're not holding their feet to grades, and they don't want them to feel bad. It's like not keeping score in sports, and it's a big problem. So.
2 quick points on this. First is, I think we need to be proactive and not just leave here being frustrated. We have a copy of a book of brilliant authors that are, okay, my wife and I wrote it. Anyway, but it's called Reclaim Your School, 10 Strategies to Practically and Legally Evangelize Your School, but it deals with all the cultural issues on multiple levels, what pastors can do, teachers can do, etc. And we make this available for free download. So if you want us to give you information for free download, just check that little box on the white sheet, and we'll make sure you get it. Second,
Brad, if I download it, can I sell it?
yes. Actually, you can. Anyone can download it and sell it and take the profit and give it to whatever you want to give it to. That's so. I mean, that's yeah, just not that guys. But then, secondly, this is really valuable. We're planning on debuting it this summer. It's called SchoolTracker.org. We're starting with Riverside County. We're scrutinizing all the school district policies in Riverside County. We'll go to county by county. San Diego, by the way, is next after this one, and then Orange County. Scrutinizing all the policies, those that are about bad policies or the good policies, and how they should be changed and can be changed, along with a parent blog where parents can come together and unite. So it's being proactive. There's a lot of understand how bad things are, but we have lots of opportunity. Here's the good, lots of opportunity to proactively take back our schools, and I think that's the positive note we need to remember.
Good. That was my next question: is what specifically can we do to get involved? That's outstanding, and thank you for the free download. So make sure the white sheets, you fill it out and check it off, because then you can get access to that material, because that's the worst part, to feel frustrated and not feel like you can do anything moving forward.
Yeah, there's tons of things that can be done, tons.
Let me add, in 2006, I released a book entitled Liberalism Kills Kids. It had a whole section on public schools and education. It's my conviction that, as I said earlier, America's in the shape she's in because the church is in the shape it's in, and the church is in the shape it's in because we preachers are in the shape we're in. It's a matter of conviction and doing what's right, not because people approve or because people may or may not withhold funds. But the same tragic circumstance that's evolved in so many preachers who are more concerned about paychecks than they are about doing the will of God has also infected the whole church. Any number of, we could change the public school systems almost overnight if all of those who name Christ, who are involved in public education, simply lived their faith, or when necessary put their foot down and said no more. But unfortunately, many a Christian teacher, and I mean some of the most dedicated members of our churches, will walk through or walk onto the grounds of a public school and lay everything they believe at the door with this false notion that's as equally as full of error as the pastor who has bought this lie of separation of church and state. You know, pastors won't mention anything about an elected official because that's, quote, mixing church and state. Or a pastor won't speak out against abortion or homosexuality because that's bringing politics into the pulpit. But the same mentality is all through our church with our lay people. A teacher, to keep her job or his job, will do whatever the administration says. They'll completely lay their faith at the door. When they lock the car in the parking lot, they lock up their faith. Those of us who are vessels of Christ need to take every opportunity we can to let our light shine. And when there comes to be a conflict between your faith, your biblical faith, and what is required by your job, Jesus should take precedent. And if enough Christians would practice that, you would see dramatic changes. Homosexuals have co-opted this country because they live their faith. They're willing to sacrifice for their faith. But Christians are not. We have a very weak-willed Christianity today that's given the culture over. There needs to be courage in the pulpit that infects courage in the pew that says no more. That finally draws a line in the sand. I mean, can you imagine Paul, Peter, and those early disciples, that early church that turned the world upside down? They lived in a culture much more corrupt than we live in. But they simply, when it came to their faith, put their foot down and said, we'll die first. Well, today, I often say to my preacher brethren, John the Baptist lost his head over an issue with a public official. Today, we won't even risk a 501c3. But filter that down to the average teacher. They won't risk their pension. They won't risk their paycheck. That's why the other side is winning. Christ has to mean more to us than that.
I was just going to amen to that. I was just going to say that, Rick, it's a vicious circle, because as we see the tilting of the makers versus the takers, it is us that are getting up in the morning time and getting to work and paying our taxes on time and trying to keep our children the straight and narrow and so on and so forth, that have, I'm not going to say the most to lose, but certainly once we lose it, then the very ability for us to be able to do what it is that we're asking and to do it in the name of Christ becomes jeopardized. So, I can say this: in the federal government, there is a huge onslaught to bring and to mainstream. We saw it in the military with Don't Ask, Don't Tell being repealed, and now having openly gay military members. That's a fact. That's not disputed at this point. In the federal system, there's an encroachment now, and I think that there's going to be a lot of federal folks that are going to find themselves in difficulty, in exactly the conundrum that Dr. Scarborough was talking about, to say, okay, do I now go ahead and put my foot down, knowing that I go home and I look my wife in the eye and I say, I lost my job today. And that's coming, and for many people in public policy, whether it's in the federal government, whether it's in faith-based organizations, whatever it may be, you're finding that more and more. The problem is that we're the ones that are driving the train for the economy. We're the ones, and if in whole mass we do that, where does that leave us? I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying that is a conundrum. I agree with everything that you said, and I hope that I would have the courage to be able to do that. I also have to look at my wife in the eye and tell her that baby needs. She's going to tell me baby needs new shoes. That is on our conscience to be able to make that happen. I think we need to be strong enough to do that.
There's a lot more at stake, though, than the baby's shoes.
I couldn't agree with you more. I could not agree with you more. I just that conundrum and that dilemma for those of us that are responsible is really the difficult. And if we did it en masse, what kind of effect might that have? I don't know.
Selling yourself short, Frank, 20-year Marine, you got more courage than most. So.
Well, I'm just saying that, just in the practicality of it, and that's something that I struggle with. I agree with everything you say. As the story would go, I'm willing to walk into machine gun fire. But to turn to my wife and say, I don't have a job, and what are we going to do? How are we going to pay the rent? How are we going to move forward? How are we going to put food on the table? How are we going to pay for oh, by the way, my son that I'm sending to private school, probably beyond our means, because I won't dare put him in a public school. Right. Which, how many of those are out there now that are making those same decisions?
That's why I have hope in charter schools. It is extremely time-consuming and difficult to start a charter school. But they get money from the state. They get to use the state's money, and they get to teach those children the Constitution, and they can do whatever they want. That's why the teacher unions hate them, because those teachers don't pay union dues. They're basically like a Christian school, except they're like our heritage. I mean, they are run like schools should be run, and they're getting tax money to do it. And we have to start those all over the city. Most areas of the city don't even have charter schools. Some charter schools are horrible, but we have a few that are very good, and that needs to be our hope.